Okay, in this video, basically what I want to do is I want to give a little introduction to coherentist epistemology. That this is basically something that has been prevalent through a lot of the history of philosophy, but I'll mostly be talking about it through reference from logical positivism, which is like the 20s and 30s through today. And we're talking about also, the 60s-ish, and even through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and ish, all through today, a little bit. But this is just like the basic go over, because following, I did a video which was an intro to foundationalist epistemology, and that's the converse of this. It's the contradictory theory of knowledge of this. So I have that video, which I did recently. So what this is, first of all, both foundationalism and coherentism are solutions to what is called the epistemic regress problem. And it also has to do with the Gettier problem, which I will address, it's also very important, but this coherentism is a solution to this. And this is about knowledge, and it's about justification. Justification, what that is like if I believe that the New Orleans Saints are going to win the Super Bowl next year. In epistemology, I have to have a justification as to why that is. Like, I have to have a belief or something which is a justification as to why that is. I can't just hold that belief. There has to be some kind of justifying belief, which is also along with this too, because which is a reason why I believe that. And if both of these are justified, or if this is justified and true, then this is in pretty much good hands. But if this is justified, then this is justified. So if I have any belief, then that belief has to be justified. So I have this belief to justify this one, and this is what would be called a meta-belief. This is a meta-belief for this belief. So this meta-belief has to be justified in order for this one to be justified. So I have this other meta-belief. So it might be called a meta-belief. So if this is justified, then this one is as well. But for this to be justified, we have to have a further meta-belief, and I have an infinity sign there because this goes infinity in a regress backwards in order for any belief to be justified. So foundationalism solves this by having a basic belief which would, I don't know if you can, we have a basic belief which justifies other non-basic beliefs. So we have a basic belief which is freestanding and doesn't need any justification outside of itself. So if we have a basic belief, and we have issues with arbitrariness, and I talked about that in the previous video, which is about foundationalism. Coherentism doesn't really adhere to anything like that. So we have what is called a coherent system of beliefs. So coherentism stops the regress. So like foundationalism and coherentism stop the regress. Infinitism is fine with such a regress, which I plan to talk about in a similar video in the future. So it stops the regress by all of the beliefs being standing in certain relation to another, in explanatory relations to one another. So if every belief in the coherent system is justified by its staying in certain arrangement or relation to all the other beliefs. So all the beliefs cohering together is the reason why any belief in that system is justified. So a coherent system has to be logically consistent. There can be no contradictions, and there has to be explanatory relations there, and they're all related in a certain way. So this belief is justified by the beliefs around it, and the whole thing, every belief here is justified just by the system itself and the system's arrangement. Now that's a very vague way of saying it. There's better ways to say it, and like I said, there are articles that I want to do videos about, similar to this, and explaining that. And I'm not sure where I stand as to where I'm the coherentist or the foundationalist or the infinitist. And I'm kind of writing a writing sample for grad schools. I'm trying to sort of, in my writing sample has something to do with epistemology and philosophy of science. So, yeah, this word dovetailing is one that comes from Lawrence Bonger, and basically Bonger, what he did was in the 80s he had this big book, which was called The Structure of Empirical Justification, I believe. And in that book, he basically argues against basicality. Basicality, I mean, by any belief being basic. He argued against that, but then following that, in like the 90s later, he waffled, basically. He flip-flopped, and now he has writings which is against this, against coherentism. He has a book that he did with Ernest Sosa, which is a bunch of articles between them two put in one book. I forget what it's called, but he has a really good argument against this in there. But also his book that is for coherentism is also very good. But he viewed the coherent system as all the beliefs in it dovetailing, in that they are arranged in that certain way, and I would plan on doing the video on that certain article by him, and also parts of that book that he did in the 80s. We had this problem of circularity. First of all, this is the structure. These are two possible structures. This is one. It's in very different. It's been given in various different ways, but one way it's been given, and one way it's pretty much understood as. It's also understood in this formulation, but it's in a circle. This belief justifies this one, and this belief justifies this one, and this belief justifies this one. So that is sometimes looked at by Peter Klein, for one thing. He's an infinitist. He had two concepts. One is called PAA, and one is called PSC. One is the principle against arbitrariness, which is against foundationalism because he believes in basic beliefs as being arbitrary. Second was the principle against circularity, which was against this whole thing. He looked at circularity as an epistemic defect, or also a fallacy, and that's something I want to look at, in the future, and I want to talk about as to why that is or is not a defect. This is another formulation. It doesn't necessarily have to be like this in a circle, but it just has to be in a coherent system like this, where no belief here is prior to another. No belief is more basic. No belief is more, discursive, or no belief is above another. There's no hierarchy, I guess. They're all on the same level, and because of the way the whole thing is together in this whole thing, as to why every belief that is a member of it is justified. A couple issues which I want to mention briefly in this is the issue of alternate coherent systems. Because we have issues with observation as well, because it's very difficult if we are a coherentist to account for things like sense data and observation and experience and observation. So it's more difficult to be a empiricist, because it's difficult in coherentism to account for observation here, because in foundationalism, sense data or observation statements or protocol statements are the basic beliefs. That's the basic foundation for all of science and knowledge, and that's the epistemic foundation. And this is what allows for the whole thing to work. But in coherentism, we don't have any belief which is prior to another. So it's difficult to account for observing things. It's difficult to account for experience and how anyone's coherent system of beliefs isn't say a product of psychosis or Fantasyland or whatever, because I could have a belief of a certain that pink unicorns are real, but and everything would cohere. There would be explanatory relations. There would be no contradictions, and it would all be logically consistent. But there's issues with truth and knowledge, and I could have a whole consistent and non-contradictory coherent system about pink unicorns being in the world, so this is the question as to how this factors in. It's called the alternate coherent systems, because I could just put in any other coherent system that is consistent and has no contradictions and is of explanatory relations, and it would all be fine. There would be no issue. So I could be having hallucinations of whatever kind and still be fine. So that's the issue, and I plan on talking about this a lot. To read about coherentist epistemology, I'm talking about mostly 20th century and 21st century. Otto Neurath, I just did a video about his article, which is called Protocols Sätze, or Protocols Sentences. He was in against people like Rudolf Carnap and Mort Schlick in the logical positivist era, like the 1930s. Later, in like the 60s, the 50s and 60s, we had Willard Van Orman Quine. He had articles like Two Dogmas of Empiricism, Epistemology Naturalized, Ontological Relativity. He also, had similar things going on, and all that matters is that everything fits together. That's what Neurath said, Quine said. Sellers, Wilfrid Sellers had a book called Empiricism and Philosophy of the Mind, and he had a part in there which is called the myth of the given. I should put Roderick Chisholm here as well. Chisholm. Looks like Chisholm, but it's Chisholm. That's another one. Yeah. Sellers, he's not that often read. Later, Lawrence Bollinger, like I said, he was a coherentist, and then he went against his own theory. Keith Layer, he has a book on it. Robert Audi, he's just he talks about various issues in epistemology, and then Roderick Chisholm has an article called the myth of the given as well, and he has a lot of good works as well. If you think I've messed something up, or if you think I've left something out, or if you have a question, please comment below. I'd love to discuss with you. And thank you for watching.